Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our 7th CanEx webinar that we've hosted. It's been, each one gets more and more interesting, and I think the feedback increases with each one of these that we host. So from our perspective, we're very happy to continue to showcase this dialogue. But more than that, I think on this webinar, again, we're very blessed and fortunate to have such a talented set of experts from the cannabis industry to talk to us today about marketing and branding for your business. It's so incredibly important that even as we build out our cannabis businesses, and in this whole election cycle, we also have to take some stock of what's happened recently. And you've had, I think it was 5 different cannabis votes that all passed. And so this bodes very, very well for where the industry is going. And even though there have been challenges, particularly in some of the startup operations here in Jamaica, just because of COVID and its challenges in terms of economic constraint, you have seen so many cannabis businesses do very well as people have needed to, to access the medicine to better handle the anxiety and the stress that they've been under. So it's a good time for the cannabis industry. And I think what this panel will do today is speak very directly to how we take our good ideas, how we bring them to life, and then how we showcase and communicate them to the wider audience in order to better position ourselves for success. So without further ado, I'm going to just quickly ask our panelists to introduce themselves. But this morning, we're joined by Elvira Guzman out of Los Angeles, a PR expert and then some. We're joined by Valda Coriat, who's with TrueLeave, the Chief Marketing Officer of TrueLeave out of, are you in Florida, Valda? I didn't even ask.
I am in Florida, yes.
Okay. I know you guys are based there, but, and TrueLeave has over 70 different dispensaries in the United States. So she has quite a lot of expertise in terms of growing a dispensary brand and so forth. Also joined by Stefan Rue out of London with It's Not Rocket Science, a branding agency based out there. And Jared Mirsky of Wick and Mortar, that's probably very familiar to quite a few of you. And they've done quite exceptional branding work in the cannabis space in particular. So I'm going to ask each of our guests to introduce themselves, and then we jump into our first part of the conversation. So Elvira, can we start with you, please, out in Los Angeles?
Definitely. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. As Douglas mentioned, I've been in the publicity and branding business for the last 19 years. And I've had the opportunity to start working with Steve Harvey as a producer for radio and TV. And at the same time, I was also going to USC. So I have a few degrees in law and politics. But I decided I wanted to start my own business. So at the age of 22, I started LVG PR. And I've had the opportunity to work with people like Music Soul Child, Lionsgate, Halle Berry. But I actually decided to get into the cannabis industry a few years ago because I got sick, and cannabis is actually what helped me recover. They detected a cyst on my right ovary, and I immediately started Googling what is something that could kill cancer cells, and cannabis is one of those things. And once I got completely cured, I decided I wanted to work in the industry so I could share the information to my media and celebrity friends. And since then, I've put on cannabis events in Beverly Hills, and I've worked with cannabis entrepreneurs like John Sally and the CEO of Pineapple Express and several others. But yeah, I'm in the cannabis industry now, and I'm loving it.
Thanks, Elvira. Valda?
Sure. Hi, everyone. It's so wonderful to be here with you. I wish I could see all of your faces. I'm very much a people person in that way. I get energy from other people. But as Douglas mentioned, I am the Chief Marketing Officer for TrueLeave, one of the top 3 performing multi-state operators in the United States. But my roots start in the Caribbean. So I was actually born in St. Thomas. So I consider myself a small island girl. My family hails mostly from Dominica and Martinique. And fast forward really to my time growing up in the US, I attended Duke University, Columbia University for my MBA, and then turned to brand management more so not only because of marketing, and you'll hear this theme throughout what I share with you today, but really believing that building brands is fundamental to business success and driving both top line growth and profitability. So it's not necessarily just a cost center. I think it actually is a revenue and profit driver. I have worked for everyone from, Colgate Palmolive, so, toothpaste and dish liquid, all the way to the beauty industry, beer, wine, and spirits via Heineken, and then moved to Florida, which is a lot warmer than New York, about 7 years ago, to focus more on either private equity backed or more entrepreneurial, and I would say fast growth companies. I did a bit working on mangoes. So the National Mango Board was my most previous role, and I was the head of marketing for that. So, I'll come back to mangoes in a second, my favorite fruit. And there is a connection to cannabis with that. Coming to Trulieve, I'm able to combine not only that classic consumer packaged goods brand building experience in multiple markets around the globe, but also that agricultural experience, because at the end of the day, cannabis is a plant, right? It grows from soil, and there's some important aspects of that I think you can also capitalize on from a marketing perspective.
Thank you, Valda. Stefan, if we can hop over the pond and tell us about yourself.
So Stefan Roux, founder of It's Not Rocket Science, formerly global creative director of Huawei, Volkswagen out of China, Colgate Palmolive founder, so we know a few of the same people, I'm sure. Been in design and branding marketing for 20 plus years, and 10 years in the legal cannabis industry, sort of working out of Canada when they first went medicinal, and then they moved into recreational, and just fascinating, endlessly exciting, and the opportunity that we have at the moment to create something and to lead it in the right direction, I think is one of the most exciting challenges in the world today. It's a new product that is very familiar and has a customer base, but it's our opportunity and our challenge to change those perceptions, change the market, and actually create something which is not only worthwhile, fun, but also medicinal and will do people a lot of good economically and in their health. Could not be a better challenge. So really excited to be on the panel today, and with all these wonderful people too.
Thanks, Stefan. And Jared, share a little about yourself, please.
See, I've been in the cannabis industry since about 2008. I started a company called Wick and Mortar. Well, it wasn't called Wick and Mortar then, it was called something else, but we rebranded about 7 years ago now. But we were the very first cannabis-focused branding and marketing firm in the world. And, now we've pretty much worked with clients in every medical and recreational state as well as country. So, one of the things that I hope to bring to this conversation is the experience that I've had the opportunity to obtain, over the past 11, 12 years of building, local, national, and global brands. I do a lot of consulting for P&G, Pfizer, Unilever, L'Oreal. So coming into this conversation, I also intend to bring in some traditional, marketing and branding insights that as you're moving from the recreational, cannabis market or medicinal cannabis market, as well as CBD market into the traditional space, you'll be able to take a lot of these tips and tools into, that new sector. But more importantly, I've just been in the cannabis industry for a long time. I love it. I have a huge passion for it. I've got it tattooed all over my arm. This is a huge passion for me. And at the end of the day, I hope to give you guys as much insight as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Jared. I'm going to start off by asking each of you to sort of identify the two top things you think that any operator, any owner, any investor should be looking at in, when they start to think through how they're going to market and position their company. What are the two top things that come to mind that should be considered? And maybe I can start off with you, Stefan. Only because you're English and we should give you guys a chance.
Oh, easy. The first thing is obviously differentiate yourself. We did a survey last year, 1,000 different CBD brands, and you look at the screenshots, everything's the same. If you don't have a point of differentiation, you've just got some cannabis. And the other is to, really stick true to your brand values. I think we'll talk more about brand values later, but they have to go across every single touch point, every action that you do has to be measured against your values. And that's how you build strong, cohesive brands.
Let me ask you the same thing, Jared. What are the two things that you would recommend people need to look at first and foremost in setting a brand direction?
The biggest missed first step is, establishing the brand foundation. Oftentimes clients come to us with a name they've already chosen, but have done no due diligence or research for or behind to determine whether or not it's even a name they can legally own, let alone a name that isn't already shared amongst other brands in different states. So having the visibility as it relates to the brands in each medical and recreational state, it gives me also the opportunity to help make suggestions as it relates to helping companies move outside of the typical faux pas. But at the end of the day, my biggest recommendation would ultimately be to look at the foundation of your brand first and foremost. Did you go through that creative brief process and ask yourself all of the right questions as it relates to the area of the industry you're in? Did you go and develop an archetype, a personality with values as it relates to the brand moving forward, so that when you're designing or writing copy, that you have this consistent tone of voice through and through? So that is pretty much the biggest tip that I would recommend is, make sure that you've built a solid foundation for your brand first, so that as you're building on top of that, it's always consistent and you're always evolving, not going back or putting lipstick on a pig.
Okay. Elvira, and yourself, what do you consider two of the most important things to look at?
I would definitely say to set goals. That's one of the major things that I see a lot of companies that they're not doing. And I don't just mean yearly goals. I mean daily goals, weekly, monthly, quarterly, so that you could keep yourself and your team responsible. And the second thing I would say is to make sure to surround yourself with people who are strong when you're weak in your areas, because that's incredibly important, especially when you're running a brand new cannabis company. Say, for example, you've never run a social media campaign or you've never done a publicity campaign. This is not the time when you should start trying new things out. Definitely hire someone who's tenured and have them execute a great strategic plan so that you and your entire team can win.
Thank you. Vala, your thoughts on the same question?
Yeah, a bit of a build on what Elvira just said. I would say to look both introspective and outside of yourself, right? So looking inside of yourself, there has to be a reason why you wanted to start this business, but also being honest about what are you personally great at? I don't mean just good that everyone else can do, but what is your secret sauce? So at what you bring to the business is hugely important and is as important as knowing what you can't bring to the business. So to Elvira's point, you bring what you're great at, and then you surround yourself with people who will fill in the gaps for the things that maybe you don't have as much experience in or what have you. But I think also a lot of times founders or people who start businesses, a lot about who they are becomes a part of the essence of the company that they're creating. And that's why I always start there, is really just from the inside. And then the second piece is, as you're looking at the business, really take some time to imagine 5 and 10 years out. Where do you envision it going? And who is that target that you're going after, that customer target, and what is the experience you want them to have? And I think a lot of those things, both looking internally as well as externally, are really important to the foundation or the start of any project or any business.
So Val, I want to jump on something you just said and throw it out to the whole panel. You mentioned about, I'm going to use the word authenticity around the owner, who started the business and what they're good at, what they feel for, because that's sort of relatively easier to tap into when you're first starting, right? Be yourself kind of thing. But in looking at how you craft the future of your business, does one not run into the potential challenge of scalability if you don't take into account the right brand values? Because at some point it becomes too much about this one person. And then how does the brand itself build from there? Is that a real concern? Is that something that can be easily sort of adjusted in time as you move forward?
Yeah, and just to clarify, Yeah, I wasn't suggesting that who you are is the brand. It was more about fundamentally what skill set and so forth you bring to the business.
Okay.
The branding side is
Okay.
different. That is actually linked more to the customers and how you're going to build the business and who is actually going to make up that market.
So let's touch on that a little bit to the panel. Like, when we talk about identifying your customers, can we drill down a little bit into what that truly means to build a successful brand and marketing strategy?
Yeah. Do you want me to jump in or somebody else?
Anyone? Yeah.
Okay. I first look at, when companies come to us, most of them have never gone through any kind of like formal brand strategy process to identify, who their target demographic is. What you'll notice is that most of the companies that come into the CBD and THC market want to build the Coca-Cola or Starbucks of cannabis, where there's no nicheness really. There's not enough nicheness to the product, right? There's no differentiating value propositions that, ultimately define that product as a purpose-driven solution versus just an everything to everyone brand. And so I think first and foremost, just to call that out, there's too many companies trying to be everything to everyone. So when you talk about, focusing on a customer persona or a customer for that matter, you have to look at, things like the customer journey and, what types of other products do they create? Are they a Mac buyer? Are they a PC buyer? Do they like junk food? Do they like healthy food? Like there are all of these different metrics that play an integral role in the decisions that you make as it relates to the products that you create and the messaging that you create behind those products. A good example is we have a client called Forefront. They're also known as Northwest Cannabis Solutions here in Washington. And they've got 24 brands. Two of them, just to name a couple, two of them are edible brands. One of them is called Marma's. The other one's called Left Handed. Well, Marma's is like a gummy, a sour gummy, THC sour gummy. And the other are Left Handed are, infused cooking ingredients. So the same customer who is into the gummy may not be into the cooking ingredients, because the person who's into the infused cooking ingredients is somebody who cares a little bit more about their health and wellness because they like to cook. So we're talking about two completely different market segments and demographics as it relates to the type of customer that might purchase that product more frequently. So when I go through this process, again, go through that creative brief, ask myself all the right questions, and then build out that brand strategy so that I know that when I'm focused on that consumer, I'm going to be focused on that consumer consistently and not erratically. And that to me is a helpful tool.
To level up on that, Jared, it's quite interesting. When we used to do global campaigns and global work, the message becomes so watered down because you're speaking to everybody that it's very bland, very tepid. When you're starting a brand and you're a small company and you want to grow, knowing your audience allows you, one, to be consistent, two, to have a really strong message that applies to those customers and appeals to them. And then three, as you grow and you're trying to target and market to them, you know who they are. You can use all of those sophisticated tools. If you just go, everybody on a Google display network or whatever you're advertising through, it's going to cost you thousands and thousands of dollars you don't need to spend. If you really identify who that audience is, what they want, and how to speak to them, then it's a really efficient process, and you build a loyal customer base who love your brand and become those advocates for you. By concentrating on your audience, giving them what they want, you create advocates. They do half of your marketing for you because they say the right things to people like them.
So is that in part, for example, Elvira, where the role of influencers comes in, or is that sort of, are we leaping too far just yet? But is that the kind of role that you're looking for, is really people who are sort of, real ambassadors and advocates for a brand? Is that linked to what Stefan's saying?
That could definitely be an outlet, but to touch on identifying your consumer, I would definitely say that is the number one thing that each company needs to do. Let's say, for example, your company is an expert at creating cannabis ointments for the knee or for back pain, then you need to do a little brainstorming and say, okay, where can I get the biggest number of that demographic to come and know about my product? I know there's a lot of companies who are focused on global branding or global publicity or marketing, but without knowing who exactly you're targeting, you're not going to get much return. Say, for example, if your demographic is 25 to 50-year-old Latino or African-American women, you know exactly where to go to market your product, and you're going to get a whole lot more for your money than just putting out a global or even a national campaign where you're just trying to target everyone, when in reality, you're not going to get those purchases at the end of the day. So even more of, I think brand ambassadors is awesome once you're starting to expand your brand on social media and online. But initially, the number one step is identifying who is your customer. And just to touch on what Valda was saying, we could start 20, 30 different companies, but we're not creating the company for ourselves. We have to think outside of the box and say, what do they need? What products will serve them best? And when you put yourself in that mindset, that's a winning mindset for any company.
So Valda, how do you do it truly? Because, you know, in essence, the story of cannabis is that it can solve so many multiple ailments, and it can be used in so many different applications that many times you hear that it's for everyone. Mm-hmm. So how do you take on that notion that everyone can have a benefit from using it, or almost everyone, and then now drill that down into something more specific like we're talking about here, which is then who am I actually targeting? And then am I really losing a lot of business by sort of not saying all these other people that I can reach to, right? Which I think is a fear some people have sometimes.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I have to say, you know, I have to acknowledge coming into the industry that, there are some, in some states, there are dispensaries that may only have one location, right? So I want to speak to that because that's a different marketing challenge, if you will, or effort than say a Trulieve, right? Which, as you mentioned, has 65 alone in Florida and growing. But for us, given the breadth of products that we have, I mean, we have everything from smokable flower, right, to vapes in different forms, right? Some are more premium than others. We have a full range of edibles, which are infused with cannabis, that could go anything from chocolates to gummies to, brownies and cookies and so forth. And so what's really important, I'll start with a large operator such as Trulieve, but I think the principles apply to everyone, is really knowing that customer and developing a relationship so that as they purchase, right? And a lot of this has to do with data, right? So knowing what people are purchasing, what is actually in their basket, why it is they're purchasing it, when they're purchasing it. It's no different, I would say, than any other retailer. But in this case, in the state of Florida, at least, and we do operate outside of Florida, we are servicing patients, right? So people with permission from a doctor, an MD, who says, you know what, for your epilepsy or your child's epilepsy condition, this specific product is what's best for them. And so they come into the dispensary with their recommendation, but then within that recommendation, there also may be some limits. So, just really making sure that you know that customer, you understand the motivation behind why they're purchasing. Honestly, you understand a little bit about their lives. We do a lot of social listening as well, and we're able to carve out what I would call consumer profiles. And those consumer profiles go beyond just age, whether you're male, female, or, under 25 or over 50. And so when we look at what we call psychographics of a consumer, it may be that this 25-year-old has the same mindset or similar values to someone who's 60 years old. And so, I'm going to take it back to really knowing your customers, right? It goes beyond the obvious. It may go beyond what you see when they walk into your dispensary, and making sure that you're almost, I want to say, cataloging, right? Certainly I'm sure Jared or others, there are briefs and there are different software that you can use to really mine a lot of this data that you're getting, but making sure that you use the data to understand your customer, and then as you interact with them and you see the sales, that you're continuing to meet those needs. And those needs may not just be a particular type of product. It may be able to be met with multiple products, and they may need things at different times. The last bit I'll say is, at least here in the US, although you see the fast spread and you're seeing everyone voting in favor of cannabis across multiple states, in many cases, though, it's still taboo. And so one of the things that we also keep in mind in how we design the products, right, the packaging, the bag that they carry it out with, et cetera, is we are looking to ensure that for those who want more discretion, right, there are some that come shop our stores who are loud and proud. They want to let everybody know. And then there are those who come in and they're like, oh, thank you. And then they almost want to put it under their arm, and walk out, as if no one saw them walk out of the Trulieve. It's not a lot of people, but it's enough, I think, for you to acknowledge. And then certainly for our elderly who may not have had any experience with cannabis, being able to provide a certain service where we are providing them educational information on the different forms or modalities, and their options, so that they're looking at us as the source of truth, right? The source of education, beyond just the source of sales.
So Jamaica is, at this moment, is medicinal. So I'm going to throw this out to the panel in total. And so one of the issues that sometimes needs to be, or I'd like your thoughts on, is, whether the people who are already sort of in the cannabis space, meaning they're already connoisseurs, they're already sold on the virtues of cannabis. And so the legal dispensation with a better standard and quality of product is a welcome addition. They want to try the different strains, they want to go to the different herb houses, etc. But I wonder sometimes whether they're also looking at the non sort of converted. Mm-hmm. And how does one start to, or, just from a marketing and sales perspective, how do you guys all think that they can look more broadly, and what's their role in looking more broadly to better understand how to reach that non-converted customer, or as you say, Valda, the one who comes in, they want to buy and get out really quickly? Because the thing that a lot of people don't appreciate is the stigmas in the Caribbean are even more acute than in North America. The smaller societies, and grandma, dad, mom, whoever all told us that this was terrible. And so now you have that to confront. So how do you navigate that path, communicate that as a solution for folks, and really put that out there from your business perspective to help grow that customer base? Or should you?
Well, one thing I always find that's kind of interesting. Oh, go ahead, Stefan.
Well, I was just going to say, it's a couple of things. One is the data, as Valda says, actually knowing who that audience is, but then it's shifting perceptions in the way that we build our brands. When you see loads of brands out there that just build on cliches and stereotypes and really reinforce some of that bad press, it doesn't work. What we're trying to do here is create modern brands, really nice retail experiences, things which are akin to an Apple store with MedMen and all this kind of stuff. That's what changes the game. That's what gets people to go in. But also that educational piece is giving everybody the backup, the authority, and the information to understand this for themselves. We all know that really well, but the customers, when the first time, they don't. But there is a trend, particularly here, and when we spent time in the Canadian market, the last people you expect are the first people that want to know. I went up to see my friend's dad, and he had pancreatic cancer, and he's like, I hear you're in CBD. Tell me about it. Gets a notebook out, starts writing notes and notes and notes and notes and notes. This is what I want to know. I need to know all of these things. 10, 15, 20 years ago, I'd have been hiding out the back, spraying myself with deodorant before I go in the house because it's cannabis. Now they come running from the other side of the room. Tell me about it. And I've had that experience 5, 6, 7 times at various events. Somebody knows and they just come running up and they want to know, they have questions. So it's our responsibility to give them the right information in the right format. Lots of the work we did for Sati Farm was based on education for retailers and for customers. Retailers who are selling this product need to be really informed. So just like you said, Valda, they can talk to their customers with knowledge, with confidence, and give that knowledge and confidence to their customers. And it's part of the mission that we're all going to share as we build this industry.
Mhm.
Yep. I was going to say, you know, in addition to the data, you know, if you've never heard of Headset, I would highly suggest checking them out. I know everyone on this panel has probably heard of Headset, but for those who have not, great resource. But what I thought was interesting is I did a survey with a company, and you know, they were they wanted to create some tobacco products, and in the pre-roll sector. And I told them that they should go smoke a cigarette on the boardwalk and see people's reactions, and then smoke a joint and then see people's reactions. Well, when they smoked a cigarette, everyone moved away from them. But the second they lit up a joint, everyone was like, where's that? What's that? Oh, I want to try that. You know, so the perception is changing quite rapidly as it relates to people's acceptance of cannabis. And I think people are starting to accept cannabis even more so than cigarettes, which is a great step towards a much healthier solution, especially as it relates to CBD pre-rolls, but that's another topic. But yeah, Valda and Stefan, you guys made some really, really strong points. You know, the personas is huge, you know, especially when you're trying to pinpoint things again beyond, you know, gender and age, right? Because people are like, oh, you know, I want to target, you know, I want to be gender neutral between 35 and 40. Okay, what else? Well, that's it. Really? That's it? So, you know, there needs to be more nicheness behind the products that we create. There's, you know, there are not enough brands that have proper communication tools. I'll give you an example. I'm working on a brand right now, and I honestly couldn't believe that the name was available, but I own now High Score. And so I'm building a nostalgic gaming brand. And so the experiences as it relates to the products are not based off of strain specificity, but based off of an experience, play, pause, and reset. And then the joints themselves are called joysticks. So there's a connection between, you know, gaming, the language behind the brand, and the demographic we're focused on. The average gamer is between 35 and 40, owns 2 consoles, has been playing for 12 years, and makes roughly $80,000 a year. So when you look at the data, more importantly, the gaming industry is larger than music and film combined. You know, you have to ask yourself, why is no one catering to that demographic of video gamers? They're male and female. So you can cater to large market segments while still being niche focused. I think that's the point that I'm making.
Yeah, and I'd just like to give my 2 little cents on it. Going back to what Valda said, Valda, I was actually one of those people that used to go to the dispensaries, and I would be embarrassed when I would walk out because I didn't want anybody to see me walking out in fear that I would lose clients, that I would lose friends. And so I would literally park my car far and I would walk up. And that's just how it was. And I had to sit down and think, why am I ashamed for people to know that I consume cannabis so that I could get healthy, so that I can feel better? And what I realized was we've been fed dozens of years of negative propaganda for this miraculous plant. And so now we have to do something about it to undo it. So one of the things that I've been doing is putting on high-end cannabis events in Beverly Hills to change the stigma so that people don't think that it's just low-class people that consume this plant for their health. And so what I've been doing is educating the media, educating celebrities, educating CEOs so that they could not just learn about it and share their stories amongst themselves, but also listen to speakers who have very valuable stories about the plant so that they could start to undo all of the negativity that we've been fed for all of these years. So I just think that all of us who do consume, we need to come out, post about it, create events, talk to our family and friends, and personally, I was actually able to undo the stigma for my father, who is 65 years old, used to suffer from depression and chronic back pain. And I got him to start using cannabis, and now he loves it. And now he's gotten his mom, who's 91 years old, to start doing the edible gummies. And now she's able to get out of her bed. She's able to walk. So just to Valda's point, at the beginning, it's a little difficult, but I think it's all of our responsibilities that we have been healed or helped by the plant in some way to do something about the negative propaganda that we've been fed for so many years.
And I just want to tap into that, Douglas. This is actually a really, really interesting conversation because if you remember, I mentioned earlier about children, right? Some of the most powerful stories I have heard are mothers who talked about how powerful the use of cannabis was for their child's condition, especially epilepsy, right? Mm-hmm. And that's the type of thing where Stefan was saying about changing perception, right? That those stories. So I think a big part of marketing, when you create a campaign, for example, right? What is the story that you're telling? And where are all of those places that you're going to tell that story? So you start with an idea, a brand idea that's true to your brand. There are stories that can build up to that idea. And then, yes, you can push it out on social media or what have you. But, you know, thinking about the Caribbean, and I hear you, right? I think if my grandmothers were alive right now, you know, they'd be in shock that I'm actually working for a cannabis company. I mean, one of them probably would be in shock, but tell me, go girl, you know, because she was a feisty, you know, maybe a little less conservative and like, go get them, you can do whatever you want type person. But I think if you think about that story from a mother and child perspective, or we have some funny ones here in the US too, in Florida, there have been articles that says, you know, grandma smokes pot, you know, so, you know, when you get those seniors who say, you know, well, wait a minute, you know, life's not over or whatever. And they come in and say how their arthritis or whatever it is that they're using cannabis for. There's just such a richness of stories. And I think the other thing too, someone mentioned MedMen. I think MedMen has been very strong marketers, right? They actually had to pull back their presence in Florida. They didn't do as well here. And that could be for a variety of reasons, but I don't think it's because of their marketing and their positioning. I think they know exactly who they are, right? But maybe there was something that didn't resonate with this market and how they do business. But in any case, from that perspective, I think they had a campaign a few years ago that just showed regular people. The concern I believe that my grandparents probably had about, you know, not going to be, it's more class-based, right? You want your kids to do better and continue to move up or whatever. But I think the other thing was the assumption that you can't function. So, you know, this is a drug that is, you know, makes you either lose your mind or act differently or whatever. And that is so far from the truth. It really depends on the application. It depends on the strain. Anyway, it depends on a lot of factors. And so one way I think maybe even in Jamaica is to think about, well, how do we change the narrative, to use Stefan's term, right? In a way where you're showing people who are willing to be shown, you know, who lead normal lives, right? Mm-hmm. And maybe they are very different, but yet the one thing they all have in common is the use of cannabis.
Well, and I think, I mean, this is a very, very rich point, because I think in Jamaica in particular, I mean, I use this, and to me, when I mention Jamaica, it's going to be very much the same thing in every nascent environment, you know. So when Trinidad comes on stream, Barbados comes on stream, all these different territories, it's the same thing. I mean, we have some folks on here from even Mexico and so forth. It's going to be the same thing in markets where it's been traditionally taboo. Now, when you now migrate, we all carry that burden, if you will, right? That responsibility is a better word, actually, of helping to change the narrative, right? But in the context of your micro enterprise, when we talk about knowing your customer, identifying your target, can we just drill down a little bit more into that? Because I think what happens is, for a non-experienced marketer, you know, that's a 10-minute exercise that ends up being so generic that you think you've now identified your target market, but you really just eliminated, 30% of the potential customers. You've really not gotten anywhere close to saying, this is what my ideal customer looks like. And I've had conversations with folks, and I'd love your perspective on this, where their goal, which might seem a little extreme, I don't know, is almost to sort of say, my ideal customer looks like this, she speaks like this, she wears this, she does, you know what I mean? It's almost that granular. And so I'd love your thoughts on, in this exercise, is that the direction that people should be looking at, even while they consider these macro considerations of growing the market and educating the market and destigmatizing it? For your particular business, how granular should you try to get to in really understanding and identifying who your customer is?
Well, it's not just something you decide, is it? It's exactly as Valent says, you've got to look at the data, you've got to understand who your audience is, where that opportunity is, where the sales are. It's very interesting, we're talking about seniors, they, when we launched Satifam CBD product, they thought their audience was people who did endurance sports and sports recovery. And 25 to 35. It totally wasn't. It was 55 plus, seniors, people with gammy knees, bad backs, can't sleep, the problems that CBD has been indicated for. And once we shifted and moved towards that audience and gave them the information they wanted to, their sales took off. So if you just go and say, okay, I want to make a product for these guys, it might not be where your audience is, where your opportunity is, where the market is. And the seniors, from what we see across the market, have been neglected by brands at the moment. Everything's young and funky, and it's something for the kids. The seniors are willing, able, have the money, and they also have the problems, particularly in a medicinal market, to require cannabis. And lots of new brands don't even think that they're very exciting, or that they want to market to that audience. But it's where the money is, it's where the people who want to try this are. And if we shift perceptions in that senior level, we're going to shift perceptions across the board, because actually it's probably our own personal fears of what your mum, your dad, or your grandparents think about this, rather than your own perception or your friends and your peers. It is those seniors. So if we can shift them along, we could do a lot of good again.
But Stefan, if I can challenge you on that, and I'm just refining my question to be a little bit tighter before the rest of the panel answers, is if what we're saying here is, before you start on your marketing journey and your branding journey, you need to be clear on who you're trying to speak to.
Yeah.
So is it to say that you have to start off with some sense of who you're going to talk to, but compile the data as you go along to figure out whether you need to pivot or change course? Is that a better refinement of my question? Because I still feel as though, number one, there isn't sufficient work done, and that's my first question, to identify in a granular enough sense who I'm targeting. And then I think you're 100% correct that once you've done that, don't skip that step, because a lot of people say, let me open up, see who comes, and then I'll change direction, right? So you get that targeted customer, if you will, but you've got to catch the data, you've got to analyze the data to determine how you shift and pivot. Is that a better way of sort of throwing it out there for you?
Yeah, I think that's more concise. It's always going to be data led. We can all stick our finger in the air and say, I think my customer is this, I think they're into this. All right, it's a valid starting point as any, but the data is what's going to give you the truth. It's what's going to give you the understanding. It's what's going to give you that basket value. And that's why I should chase them. The issue that we have in this market is there is a vast shortage of available data.
Right.
It's nascent, it's new, it's banned from loads of platforms. So we're not getting the data that we would if we were selling alcohol or cigarettes or cars, but it will be available. There are companies doing this. New Frontier, for example, CBD Intel, they are starting to provide data, and it's a fantastically valuable starting point for any company or brand coming into the market to go through that, to actually see who is spending the money, which state they're going to operate in, which regulations they're going to operate in. Is Jamaica the market for them because they want to sell a recreational product? No, it's not legal yet. So have a look somewhere else. Really drill into that data and understand where your product's going to fit, and then what the audience is that's going to buy it. And there is data available, but it's not as easy as anything else.
Douglas, if I could offer this as well, we like to say at TrueLeave that we grow one customer at a time. right? And so with that, what I'm saying also is, and I am thinking more of smaller businesses than, like I said, than these multi-state or multi-location. But if I personally, Valda, were starting a dispensary, right? I would know realistically what geographic span I am likely to get customers from, right? So I think just very practically for people that are looking to start a business, how broad can your operations actually reach, right? So I'm going to use Trinidad, that's where the Coriettes are from. My husband's Trinidadian. So if you're in Arima, right, you're not, which is one part of the country, you're not likely, right, to be able to restock daily and so forth, service a customer who is in San Fernando. And so, and what are those different, those regional differences? Even within Florida, Miami is very different than North Florida. Okay. So our dispensaries, even for us, the mix of products in Miami has its own characteristic. And what happens is actually and to your point, Stefan, of not having data, you get data all the time. When somebody comes in and they buy, if they're, a lot of them, especially if they're unhappy, they'll let you know, right? But what are you doing? Are you having a brief survey, right? Or is there something that's handheld that you can, occasionally or whatever, ask them for their feedback? I think a lot of times in a digital world, we lose sight of the relationship, right? And relationship, and it's funny because within digital and social, the word engagement means something, right? But yet offline, I don't know that and of course, COVID has affected a lot. So we're going to assume COVID went away, okay? But outside of a COVID experience, right? Your customer comes in, you greet them with a smile, hopefully, they purchase what they like. Is there anything else? Think about just those little things in terms of making sure that you truly are making that customer feel, like you appreciate the money that they've spent, right? I'm just going to make it very plain. And then if they're unhappy, you got to take it on the chin and say, you know what? Okay, what can we do to make up for that? We actually offer 100% return policy. If someone purchases something from us and they are not happy, they can come back and return it for something of equal value and so forth. So we stand behind the quality of our products. We stand behind that what we have on the label is what you will get on the inside. But I think more importantly, we recognize that we may not get it right 100% of the time. And so when we don't get it right, we ask them for that feedback and again, it's person by person. So if you're in one parish or one location of a particular island or country or whatever, Mexico has many different regions. I see we have someone here from Mexico. It really is your customer base is going to come from there. Or, this is another idea as well, is are you targeting locals or are you targeting tourists? Because how you design your dispensary and how you, even how you engage, right, with tourists might actually be very different than, or the tools that you use different than what you would use with a local population.
Very true. I wanted to pivot on to broader topics like, IP and talk about, sort of brand issues, AKA, brand Jamaica, brand Mexico, and what those things truly mean in constructing a business model. But, Jared, yesterday on when we were chatting, you're talking about the strain game and this sort of overemphasis on, I mustn't say overemphasis, I'm coloring my question, right? But this focus on strains. And, again, we go back to that original point we were discussing, which is if you're selling to the connoisseur, the sort of cannabis aficionado versus the person who really doesn't know that much about cannabis, they have an ache and a pain. And like I've received before, a phone call from someone who might have seen me do an interview. And I'll never forget a lady with, her voice croaking and said, Mr. Gordon, and her thing wasn't that she wanted to join the cannabis revolution. Her thing was she's tried everything. She's tried everything her doctor suggested, and she's ready to try something different. And, hearing a voice that she thought that she could relate to or she could get the contact information from, that's what she wanted to hear. And so in terms of the specificity of strains and from a marketing and a branding perspective, their relevance, I wonder when we talk about that non-cannabis consumer walking into the dispensary, and I think of that lady coming in, maybe having been convinced that, medicinal cannabis can remedy some of her ailments and come in and try it. When she walks in and she hears about, OG Kush and this one and that one, and there's a 21-year-old bud tender who's going to explain it all to her, is that really effective to that particular consumer?
No, strain specificity is a little bit more complex. And in my opinion, I predict that it's going to be far less important as it relates to the customer journey from a new consumer perspective, simply because as a connoisseur myself, I still go to dispensaries and ask questions like, what do you have that's going to make me feel this way or that way versus, what kind of new strains you got, because most of them don't know shit about the strains anyways. And that's okay, because again, a large part of what we need to remember is that education is a huge proponent in what makes this industry work well. The more we educate people, the more they know. However, there is not enough education being done on behalf of brands and retailers alike. Leafly did a great job when they started at delivering a lot of, 101 guides as it related to dabbing or edibles or, smoking flower. And so I feel like that's a huge piece missing. But more importantly, when you look at the customer journey, and this is kind of a weird example, but I'll use like Shutterstock as an example. When you go to Shutterstock, there's millions of photos, right? So if they were, a cannabis website and they categorize all their photos via strains, that would be very difficult to source through because there's so much more missing information from what is relevant to that particular image. So if you're visiting Shutterstock, for example, and you type in landscape, right? It's going to give you landscape images from a number of different alternate categories. So it makes it easier for the consumer to find the image they're looking for amongst millions of photos. The same could be said about cannabis. You've got thousands of strains. The strain is already on the variable data label, so that's going to be there. So if you're worried about strain specificity being absent or obsolete from the product, it's going to be there no matter what. So focus on communicating, words that relate to the potential experience that the consumer may have. By doing that, it also gives you the ability to add new strains and remove others without having to necessarily change your packaging either. So if, for example, I used pause, play, and reset, and let's say pause was, 3 different hybrid strains, well, I could interchange those strains because they're all really relatively similar in experience. So I don't need to necessarily update the packaging to reflect that new strain of the week or new strain of the month, because strains come and go, and you may not have access to that strain forever, right? So it's good to kind of categorize your products based on experience and not based on strain specificity.
I think there's
flexibility.
Simple answer to this question, though, and we've already mentioned it several times. It's know your customer. The strain game is for connoisseurs. It's for people that will fly halfway across the world to go to the Cannabis Cup. They're definitely a market. But lots of cannabis brands have been started by people who are very passionate and know about strains, and they've not thought about their customer. There's connoisseurs, they want to know the strains, they know pretty much what they're looking for, and they're excited to try something. And there's other customers that want to come in and go, okay, I want something that's going to make me feel a little bit lively, nice and chatty, or I want something that's going to keep me locked on the sofa for the rest of the evening. And that's what they're looking for. So if you know your customer, you can actually target at them and describe these things in the way that they're looking for too.
Yeah. And here's a pretty good example. This is a 93-page document that we made for Aurora. This is quite literally, well, I've got this green screen thing on, but it's it's got everything, it's got everything in it from, the history of cannabis to, I mean, well, shit, this thing. Anyways,
Okay.
This is a 93-page, modular based, sales book that, you can as a dispensary, or as a brand, you can go in and you can, pull out pieces and give them to the buyer, and it gives them the breakdown on the education and the your social responsibility. And we haven't really touched on that yet, but all of the things that are needed to better communicate and simplify the process.
Yeah, I want to offer a little bit of a different perspective. We actually, I would say that I think not everyone is as sophisticated as what we call the canna connoisseur, right? Who's going to be able to tell you from experiencing the product the difference between strains. But, and maybe this is driven as a medicinal market, but when you think about medicine, people want to know what's in their medicine. And when you're dealing with health conditions, right? So for example, when we, started and edibles may not be the best example because that's closest to non-cannabis, right? But people want to know whether it contains sugar, is it made with pectin or maltodextrin? That matters to them, right? Based on their own personal physiology. But to the strain specifically of the flower, what we've tried to do, to the extent that we have, and we're required here in Florida to do third-party lab testing. We also do testing of our products in-house. So it's kind of double tested, right? To make sure that it's safe for our patients, no mold and so forth. And at least in Florida, I can tell you from everything I've seen, they appreciate that information, and we give them the strain name. Sometimes, to be honest, the strain and its origins create a story. And it makes it very interesting to be able to market one indica over another, or, the benefits of an indica versus a sativa, et cetera. And then beyond that, it's okay, so really help me with this education of the plant. We talk about, the major and minor cannabinoids. Again, this all comes from the third-party lab testing. We also talk about the terpene content, which, if you get above 2% out of a strain, that's pretty remarkable here, and the flavonoids. So we're taking it, we are doing, I would say, the R&D behind the products, but delivering it, and I think, Jared, this is part of what you're saying. I don't think it's an absolute decision on strain, but you might be able to take that strain and the specifics of that strain and build something around it, but also make sure that what the customer is getting is going to meet all of their needs, or make sure that it doesn't do them any harm. So I kind of have to say that, especially from a medical market perspective, we put a lot of information on our products, and people can actually put in the batch numbers, the specific batch number, not just the strain, but that specific one that was produced. Tell me more about it, and they can go to our website and do that.
Yeah, and the thing though is, like, when you're launching a brand that has competing strains with another company that sits on the shelf right next to your own product, at a point it becomes, how do you differentiate the emphasis behind your strain, versus theirs, even though they're identified the same. Blue Dream is Blue Dream is Blue Dream is Blue Dream, right? So what makes your Blue Dream better? Right. And I think that's the communication piece that I'm referring to, as it relates to the experience. And I think, without, going too far down a rabbit hole, I think as long as you recognize that, you don't have any proprietary genetics, right? If you don't have your own unique strains, then look to differentiate the way you develop the language around them, so that you're not, identical to the box next to yours or the jar. That's what I meant by that. But
give an analogy.
Aldi, you're right.
Wine, right? There's loads of Merlots, Malbecs. They start to talk about their terroir, their authenticity, their heritage, their provenance. All those kind of things come to play in the wine market. And yes, you've got 17 different types of Merlot, and some are from France and South Africa, and that's what they sell on.
Well, and what's
going away, but
what's interesting is, like, the cannabis industry is the only industry that I can think of that has that doesn't have like this global packaging language that beer and coffee and wine can all adopt. You know, wine's got, you know, Chardonnay, Riesling, and all of these variations. Coffee's got morning blend, deep roast, dark roast. And, you know, as part of the brand ritual that new companies absorb or embody as they enter into these different industries, they all use the same vernacular. But in cannabis, we are using we have a product that is quite literally in 3 market segments: medical, recreational, and wellness. So to create a packaging language that is unified across all industries is just not there. It was indica, sativa, and hybrid, but people are starting to realize that that's a bit of bullshit. Everything's a hybrid for the most part. And, you know, because of our own endocannabinoid system, you know, an indica to Valda may be a sativa to Stefan. And so, you know, you can't really say with certainty on your packaging, because of how it affects people differently, that this is going to be more indica dominant or even more sativa dominant, because it's different. And then you go into the science. When you smoke flower or any kind of cannabis for that matter, through decarboxylation, you lose like 70 to 80% of the plant's original profile anyways. So are you really getting 100% of the medicinal modality or benefits of that particular strain? So then you have to look at, how are you being careful about the words that you use to describe the experience, because you can't make claims. And that's a huge issue in CBD. Mm-hmm. So just kind of helping, you know, bring up these topics as they relate to variations of brand types. And because they're problems, but also opportunities. I think what's great about the fact that we are in this cannabis industry and that there's 3 different market segments is that we get to create our own unique packaging language. I wouldn't want to use deep roast or morning blend on my cannabis packaging, you know? So it's nice that we have a lot of creative freedom to do what we want, but yeah, that's my
let me throw this out there, because I mean, again, someone asked it about Mexico. I know, bringing it back to the Caribbean a little bit, you know, Jamaica, a lot of what we see in here in Jamaica is that the, you know, brand Jamaica, which is it used as a marketing tool in other industries. But when it comes to cannabis, there's a real sense of like, you know, Jamaica has this very unique market positioning, right? But so I'm going to throw out to each one of you, because I think in the cannabis industry, yes, Jamaica certainly has a special place in everyone's heart. You know, all the sort of associations from reggae music, Bob Marley, Peter Tosh, etc. But how do you now, from an IP perspective, position so that the Jamaican, you know, and we talk about knowing your audience, we talk about, you know, positioning and so forth. How does that best translate into a marketable product or brand that has, you know, unique properties that can have global relevance? Or from a tourist perspective, when they come in here, you're taking the best of the associations and making the most of them. And I'm saying this because, again, the question was asked of Mexico. And I think, you know, there are other jurisdictions that all seem to feel that we have this unique thing. But how do you take that and really, you know, manifest that into, from a business perspective, and protect it?
I mean, you look at it like coffee, you know, you know, you look at Colombia and what they've done to develop a name as it relates to the coffee that's, you know, cultivated there. So I think that if you're talking about, you know, I guess paying homage to regional environments, you know, like Humboldt County, you know, you kind of look at it like that, but on a larger scale. Whereas Humboldt is much like, you know, wine country. You know, they've got appellations and microclimates and regenerative farming techniques and, you know, all of these really interesting factors that make their cannabis quality more superior than others. And so you could look at, if branding a country, right, based on a particular product, you know, you could say that there's a particular, you know, weather condition, right, that makes the strains that you grow there different than what could possibly be grown in states or recreated in the states. So I think if you're talking about that, you know, I think it's pulling pieces in from that, but also, you know, from the culture. You know, Jamaica has had this reputation of 3 primary colors for a very long time. And I think it's time to kind of move out of that Rasta environment and into something that is a lot more professional. And when I was in Jamaica, when you flew me down there last time, Douglas, I mean, I went and checked out all of the different coffee shops, and I went and checked out, you know, all of the, you know, a lot of the different, you know, candy stores, just to kind of see what some of the packaging looked like and how they were branding some of the wine products that they had there. And it's very different. It's very different, but it's not so different from what you see in the States that it couldn't translate either.
Yeah, well, from a branding standpoint, I'd like to offer this. Once again, we keep touching on the same issue where we definitely have to know who our customer is, who is our demographic. And Douglas, since you mentioned Mexico, my family's from Mexico. Something that I would do to brand cannabis in Mexico is with coffee. Just like you were mentioning, Jared, Mexicans, we could drink coffee morning, lunch, dinner. We even drink it for dessert with a little piece of bread at nighttime. So if I were to create a cannabis brand for Mexico, that would definitely be an avenue that I would begin in, because frankly speaking, smoking cannabis, where people like your family or just strangers could see you, that's still full pot in Mexico. So I would definitely start there. In Jamaica, I would have to know more of what that country likes. But just knowing from the tourist numbers, I know Jamaica is one of the most toured places in the world. I would definitely cater to tourists. So pre-rolls comes to mind because it's something quick and easy that they could take to their hotel rooms. So you really just have to know who your customer is and start to think, what is something that they would want? What is something that they would consume and that they could consume every day or as frequently as they would like?
I'm gonna jump in and say a little something. So I hear you, Jared, right? On maybe not being limited to Rastafarianism, right? And red, gold, green. But I don't know that you necessarily have to completely throw it away.
Well, if every company starts to leverage the same color palette across every brand, you're going to see a huge issue.
Yeah, and let me give you
like
some
green and cannabis. Yeah, like
I'm gonna dig in a little bit. Okay, red and white. You see it on Coca-Cola. You see red dominant in MedMen, right? You see red dominant. Let's say McDonald's. Maybe the Golden Arches is more significant. So again, I'm challenging it simply because the work that I did with Heineken wasn't just for brand Heineken, but I remember specifically one of the projects, and it's not going to be as well known. But there's a beer in Martinique called Lorraine, right? Bière Lorraine. And again, red and white. The relaunch that we did for that campaign in Martinique, I think is still going on today. And the reason I bring that up is there was a way to take, and excuse the noise in the background, I think somebody's mowing the lawn. Anyway, hopefully you're not hearing too much of that. But there are ways, I think, to, I guess, echo a bit of the culture in a new and different way. I'm a huge believer, for example, in symbols, right? I love art. I love history and culture. So it's not necessarily the very generic, right? You know, somebody throwing their dreads all around, kind of look Rasta. But are there images and so forth within the culture that those who know would recognize, but those who don't might be intrigued by, that then become an icon that you create a brand symbol around? That maintains the authenticity of the culture and can carry it forward in a way that is maybe more modern, less stereotypical. Like, I mean, that's like real hard work, I guess. And so it's almost, for me, one of those things where it is something that you would do in a very iterative fashion, right? And it's something that you start with, okay, here's the obvious, right? What is it about this that actually resonates with more people or with the people that I'm trying to target? And then how do I deliver it in a way that differentiates me from everybody else in Jamaica who could also claim the same or use the same colors. So the colors in and of themselves, I don't think are the issue. I think it's how you apply it. So it doesn't have to be the whole package is red, gold, and green, but do you create a shape? Is there something, I don't know, I'm making, the Bear Lorraine example, there was actually a very old cross, right? That is iconic to the packaging. And we wrote a brief for a creative agency, and they basically took the history of that beer but reimagined it into not only packaging, but also a more modern package, but also a campaign that elevated the pride of the people of Martinique. Because I think had I gone into Martinique and said, okay, Bear Lorraine, you need a refresh, your sales are going down, whatever, you need to get rid of this cross and put it on the back label, that could have had some serious backlash, right, from that target demographic, because it very much was the local beer, and it was something that was meant to be a source of pride, right? So I guess I would just be careful that, again, it's more about not being so stereotypical and samey, right? And thinking about how you can take the known and make it more interesting or different.
Yeah, and digging that little bit deeper, we're all talking about not reaching for the obvious cliches, the dreads, the red, gold, and green. If you dig deeper into the culture, if you start to look at the values, you start to look at the stories, there is a wealth of information in there. There are really beautiful things that you can build strong brands around, but you've got to go that step deeper. You've got to look further.
Yep, that's right. I agree completely with that. I mean, I think, when you look at the red, green, and yellow colors too, if you were to take those same colors, if you saw those colors on just 5 brands, it would be evident, in Jamaica that they were using the same color palette. Now, don't get me wrong, a lot of brands use very similar color palettes, and to Valda's point, it's a matter of how you use that color palette, the textures, you could have, it could be gold packet, it could be gold on the inside and red on the outside, and have a hint of, green accents, which could look very sexy, to Valda's point. But it gets to a point where, it's then being overused. And so in order to mitigate the risk of overusing something that most people gravitate towards because it's what they personally like and not what they think their customers are going to like, just something to consider. But great points, everyone. Thank you.
Well, I think it circles back in some way, shape, or form to, again, the original statement, right? Is who is your customer? And then as you survey that landscape, is understanding, and we haven't talked about this too much, but I'd like to touch on it a little bit, is how do you then identify your unique selling points? How do you identify what makes your brand specifically unique? Because again, if you go into an environment which has already different variations of a theme, that's not one of your points of differentiation. You have to get away from that. So in a way, Jared, that sort of neutralizes that concern of sort of being not me too, a cliche as Stefan likes to say, because you already know you're not going to differentiate on that particular brand value. So how do we maybe just quickly, identify what becomes some of these, key identifiers, particularly for folks who are just setting up? And I know, Jared and Stefan, you've done this with brand positioning. But, Valda, for someone who's opening a dispensary, so it's 2 things, right? It's my brand identity, yes, but it's also how do I make that customer experience coming in? And I'm asking specifically of dispensaries because I would like this information to get into the local market as well as folks opening in other jurisdictions to see the difference. My brand identity as well as my customer experience in a dispensary setting. And then how do I identify those unique brand values? And then even Elvira, you can take that forward as well in terms of how do I communicate that, my uniqueness at the same time, being a part of a whole.
Okay, did you wanted me to start? So yeah, I think the customer journey mapping is something we talk about, right? So it's almost as if when does the customer first learn about you? Is it because they're walking by? What is that customer experience when they first know about your dispensary or your brand? And then what are the other experiences that they have with it? When you walk into a dispensary, I think everything down to the design, right? And the flow. So do you want it to be more of a, I'll call it like an art gallery where people are, you know, freely observing and taking in the environment? Or there's some places that design very well for efficiency, right? It's the, you know, almost as if you're at Disney World and you're in a line and it snakes you through, you know, a path to purchase, basically, to the end experience. So we do talk a lot about customer journey mapping and figuring out, you know, what steps the customer takes first to be aware of your brand. Once they're aware, then what do they do? And then once they've purchased or interacted with your brand, what happens next? And once you have sort of that journey mapped out, then you can look at the steps along that customer's journey and figure out how do you enhance that experience. And when I say experience, I mean, it doesn't have to be in person, right? For example, you know, here, at least in the US, we do email campaigns, text campaigns, right? To reach our customers. Email is obviously a richer media. So is it, you know, a once a month newsletter that you're sending them the information or stories or recipes that they can then use cannabis with, right? Is that something that matters to them? A text message we use more as a call to action to reach the customer. So the brand identity is one thing, but I think the customer experience very much has to do with all the different touch points that the customer has available. When they see you on social media, does the brand present itself the same, right, on Twitter as it does on Facebook? And is that customer going to both places? I can tell you, I know the difference between, of all of our customers, I know the difference between those who are on Instagram versus Twitter versus Facebook. They look different, right? And so the way that we, you know, put messages out there, our creative, our actual copy, the words that we use vary based on understanding the demographics of customers and where we reach them.
Yeah, and just to add to your points, Valda, in order to get people to know about your product or your dispensary or whatever you're trying to get out to the world is publicity, publicity, publicity. A lot of companies tend to think that marketing or publicity is something that you do once your company has launched and it has started to make revenue. But no, in order to make that revenue, you need publicity. And there's various ways, like Valda was mentioning, social media is an incredible way to reach the customer. I also love her ideas about the newsletter. I think that's awesome. Text messages. Another few outlets that I would like to bring to the table is TV, radio, magazines. And I know there's regulations in place by the FCC, but with the right publicists, with the proper connections, you're able to get on TV or get major magazine articles. And lastly, I would just say to do events. That's something that I learned from branding guru Steve Stout, who I had the opportunity to work with when I was in New York. And he would actually put on these mixers every Thursday at his office. And he would bring the top media, the top CEOs, the top people in his communities to then so that they could get the word out about whatever project or campaign he was running. So just to drill it in, publicity is incredibly important. And one thing that I always tell my clients is before you start your business 90 days out, you have got to hire a publicity company to start doing a strategic plan for marketing, for branding, for publicity, because all of those elements are completely different, but they all have to go in the same direction in order for the company to achieve all of the goals. But definitely publicity is something that everyone should be thinking about.
One thing I'll say to add on to that, because not everyone can afford PR, right? And so I think for that reason, it's worth mentioning this, because when I started my company, 12 years ago, 11 years ago, there were no PR firms working with cannabis companies yet because there weren't really many. So I had to get creative and I had to start reaching out to people that were already writing about cannabis. So what I did was, and this is just a tip for people, who are looking to earn some free earned media, even while working with a PR firm, I think that this is smart to do. But, you know, I'll read articles that are written by people who are talking about subject matters that I'm an expert in, or a partial expert in, right? Whether it be branding, marketing, this or that, whatever it is, primarily focused on cannabis. So I'll scroll down to the bottom, I'll find their username or where their Twitter is or their Instagram, and I'll hit them up. Hey, if you need a subject matter expert next time you write about this particular thing, consider me. And so I'll set up a call, and before you know it, you know, now I've been featured in Forbes probably like 20 times, and I write for High Times now, and I write for MG and Inc. and Entrepreneur and all of these things. And I did that without hiring a PR firm, but it was because I also have that personality, and not everyone has that personality, but I had that personality where I wanted to go and I wanted to meet everyone I possibly could. I have a PR firm now, and I have a publicist now because I am just too darn busy to do all of that myself. You know, as much as I did in the past, but there are ways that if you are, you know, balling on a budget, you know, and you're trying to make the best moves strategically that you can internally, there are steps that you can take to make Elvira's life a lot easier once you hire her later, when you can actually afford to pay for those services. But I think on that topic, Doug, maybe we should talk a little bit about, you know, what do these types of services cost? Right?
Yeah, I want to do that, John. I want to get to this question that's been sitting here for a minute, and then I want to do costs, and then I want to actually talk a little bit about the digital marketing, how we get started, and do's and don'ts. Because again, there's a lot of uncertainty around what works for social media, what doesn't work for social media, particularly in the cannabis space. What we can get away with, what we can get shut down for, and how we navigate that. But the question that came in is, the legal cannabis industry has grown a lot and is getting very saturated, which can be very overwhelming when it's first starting to try to get into it. Can you speak to how one should best position themselves to start? For context, I live in New Jersey, and as you know, we finally just passed a law for recreational use. So this comes back into how do we get started? So I wanted to use this as a channel to sort of answer that question. So
I would love for the person who put the question to maybe, I guess, if they could share a little bit more about what part of the industry do they want to get into, or where do they, you know, how do they think what type of business would they want to come into it with?
Yeah, Jolade, okay, it's me. I know it says it's me. All right, so go ahead and let us know.
And in the meantime, what I would like to offer is to, if you want somewhere to begin, start going to seminars, start joining webinars, just like we're doing now, network your way in. And just like in any industry, you never are going to start at the top. I would say to get a mentor or get a few mentors that are already doing what you want to do, and shadow them, see how they make it, see how they failed, and start to create your own plan. And once you feel like you have the knowledge necessary to start your business, then take the leap. Once you have the contacts, once you have the experience and the resources. So that would be what I would like to offer to them.
Sure.
I would say check out Green Flower Media too. A lot of people who are confused about what they're good at or what they'd even enjoy doing in the space, but know they want to get into it. I think that's a great resource to find jobs and careers that are available, that people are actually, you know, doing, and that there is actual training for. So that's also a good.
Yeah, and do something you excel at, right? We've spoken about this before. Do the thing that you excel at, and then employ some experts to do the things you're not so good at. You know, find that little niche of your own, but go out and do your research. Go and do secret shopper visits. You know, go and see every product available and line them all up on one page and see where the space is. You know, if you do your research and you analyze even just desktop research and say this company's over here and it does this thing, and this one's over here and it does that, you will start to see a pattern, and you will start to see where your available niche is. If you apply your skills and what you're good at on top of that, you will start to build towards a successful brand and business. But if you just go, I want to sell cannabis, you're going to fail.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I love that going, you know, that desktop research that you're talking about, Stefan, and looking at the market. It looks like she did give some more specifics. She's looking into opening a dispensary. So that's where I wanted to get a little more before I answered. I think as everybody's been saying, you know, there's so many resources that you can find, but I would look specifically within the state of New Jersey, if that's where you're looking to operate, to learn the regulations first. That is huge. And I mean huge. I have learned so much because I'm having to learn the regulations of 5 different states. I'll give you for example, in the state of Connecticut, the person who dispenses marijuana has to be a pharmacist. Okay. In the state of Florida, that is not required. It's only medicinal. In the state of Massachusetts, there's both medicinal and rec, but the difference in how you, let's say, package or how customers get information on the exact same product for recreational use versus medicinal use is different. So, you know, I think there are a number of, and you can maybe even search on social media, there's a number of groups, some of them are private, where people share information about the industry specific in their state. There's a ton of them in Florida, and like I said, they're more private, but if you search, you know, by certain keywords, marijuana, cannabis, business, industry, whatever, you'll find some of those groups, and then start, you know, if there are live in-person events, then reach out to them, and hopefully you can have a real conversation, even if it's by phone. The other thing, I think, as Stefan said, I would do a tour, go visit the dispensaries that exist, especially within the geography that you're interested in opening one, to see how broad is their menu, right? You can also do it online as well. Right. So it's almost like doing a market assessment is what I would call it. Right. Where would you like to open one? How many are there? Are they all from one company? Like you got 5 True Leaves in one area, you might not want to open one there. Okay. Because we suck the air out of the room with our operational strength. But if you go to a location where it takes 45 minutes, right, to get to the next dispensary, well, you need to understand, first of all, why aren't there more in that area? Maybe they just haven't opened yet, and you opening one there might actually be great because you have that first mover advantage. Okay, so I think you need to do probably a market assessment. And actually, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn, by the way. I would love to. I'm from the Northeast, so I know New Jersey, New York, and Connecticut like the back of my hand. And I'm happy to share some of those resources with you, but you need to know New Jersey inside out. There's nothing outside of New Jersey that's going to help you open a dispensary. And then the other piece I will say, might not be a bad idea to get a job, even if it's part-time, below your level or whatever, working in one of those competitive dispensaries, if you can do it, because then you're able to see the operations of that dispensary from the inside, and you can have a start and an end date, right? You're like, you want to work there for about 6 months to see how it's going. You know, then you have, you know, even better market assessment, right? It's not theory in that case. You're hearing customers come in, what they're saying, what, you know, what is working, what's not working, etc. So focus, location, competition in that area, and then get real life experience and reach out to as many people as you can so that you know the regulations and the rules inside and out.
You know, if I may just tack on a comment, is that, and we talked about it a little bit before, we talked about it just now, but I get a question very often as to, I want to get into the cannabis industry, you know, what should I do? And you know, this goes back to, you know, what you were saying, Stefan, and what we talked about yesterday at Uvalde, which is you need to understand the range of skill sets that are required to be successful. The cannabis industry is not particularly easy. You know, it's a new industry. There's a ton of regulations. As Valda just said, if you don't understand the regulations, or you're not willing to do the work to understand the regulations, it's essentially like putting a gun to your head and making sure you're gonna fail, right? But beyond that, the skill sets that you require for the business to succeed means that not everybody can do everything. And so when people come and they ask me, Douglas, what should I do? I own land. You know, the first thing I say, that's fantastic. Do you like agriculture? Do you like to grow? Do you like to be in the hot sun at 12 o'clock in the day to understand your crops? No. Well, then don't cultivate. You know, you do what you're good at. And I think that, but value additive thing, and Stefan even spoke to just now yesterday, which is, and you build your network around it. You build your partnerships. So it's not just a function of, I need X amount of dollars in order to hire the skills that I don't have, right? It's about, if you take a partnership mentality, what I've found in the cannabis space is that people are willing to collaborate and work with you and support you if you're real and you're authentic and you're really trying to get somewhere. I found people very receptive to supporting me. You know, I've even had conversations with Jared and Stefan, and they said, yeah, let me, you know, do you mind if I give you some feedback on this? Sure. Okay, great. Scrap it. It's terrible. You need to do da-da-da-da-da. But you're getting that because they see what you're doing and they have expertise or exposure and they want to help you grow. I mean, Elvira has helped us so much, even with some of our social media stuff, just little tidbits. Douglas, do this, do less of that. And I'm saying this to say that once you have a mentality of building partnerships to understand the totality of the expertise that's required, and you focus on what you're good at, you can be an accountant. You know, there's Kamara Kood, who I just saw made a comment in here. He has Keith Magazine. I remember our first CanEx, he floated the idea, and now his magazine is coming to be published. You know, it's wonderful to see these things happening. But, you know, he's in the media business, but he's in cannabis now. And, you know, when Jared started, there weren't publicists who specialize in cannabis. Elvira does that now. The fact of the matter is, do what you love, do what you're good at, do that thing that when you get a call at midnight to say everything blew up and fell apart, you're happy to go pick up the pieces, right? And then build the partnerships around it. I think the build the partnerships part is so critical because, yeah, we can go out and do the things that we love, but if we don't do that other step of building that network, we're slightly less doomed to fail, but our road is going to be, you know, just as equally challenging. So what I'd love to do is close off here by asking you all to share a success story that you've had, and then some closing words, because I like to keep our things on point. And what's interesting about today is I thought yesterday we covered so many awesome points that we should bring across today, and then we've sort of navigated all over the place. Not in a disparate way, a very high value way. But it just shows how, you know, one, the range of knowledge of you guys as panelists, and number two, how sort of vibrant and dynamic this industry really is and what the opportunities look like. So I'd love for you guys to share a success story from a branding and marketing perspective. It doesn't have to be one of your clients or something direct, but that you've seen that has worked that we can share with our audience today. And then some closing words just as we bring it together. But we can do the story and go around, and then we can, you know, close off with some words. So Elvira, I don't know if you wanted to kick us off.
Sure. So one of my biggest success stories as it relates to branding and marketing is when I did the publicity campaign for Steve Harvey's book, Act Like a Lady, Think Like a Man. At the time, he had only wanted to sell $300,000 worth, and it was my job to create a plan in order for him to achieve that. But my plan was not just $300,000. I wanted him to make a whole lot more because I knew that here in the US, and going back to data, 51% of women are single. And so I knew that a relationship book would do extremely well, even though his previous venture, which was to release suits for women, didn't work at all. But that's because single women perhaps don't want to wear as many suits, but they do want to read a book and try and find a relationship. So after doing my research and after guiding him on what type of book he should write, I did a little brainstorming. I was like, well, where can we get the most amount of people that would purchase this book? And at the time, Oprah Winfrey, her show was #1, and she sells more books than anybody else on this earth. And so I got him on the Oprah show, and he didn't just sell $300,000 worth. To date, he sold over $125 million worth of that book. And that is simply because of a great marketing, a great branding plan, and doing research and knowing what people need, not just what you want to release, but what do people need. That is what's going to give you the best success stories. So that's mine.
Thank you, Valda. I mean, Elvira. Sorry.
And would you like me to give closing remarks?
No. I want to do the success story. I was just making that pregnant pause to see who would jump in next. But go on, Stefan, you can go.
All right. I'm not actually going to talk about success, Douglas. I'm going to talk about one of my failures and something that I really, really wanted to achieve. And I think it's really important when we're speaking to new brands and people who are attending today that they think about these things. And it was the plastic packaging for the Canadian recreational market. It really annoyed me. You know, you used to have you're in a tiny baggie, and now it's got a huge plastic tub that's not very recyclable, 2 different types of plastics in a cardboard box with a leaflet in it. We wanted to transform that and make it out of hemp plastic, which is compostable. It's part of the plant. It's a waste product from the industry. It made everything holistic, and it would make this whole story beautiful. And instead of adding yet more plastic packaging to the environment and the world, we're actually utilizing and demonstrating some of the other fantastic qualities of this plant. So I'm still going to turn that into a success story one day, but I failed to do that on that particular job. And I want to mention to everybody on the panel and everybody attending that hemp plastic is out there and it's fantastic. You know, we don't just have to talk about flower. The potential for this plant is huge.
I agree. People are taking the waste from their plant, from their cannabis, and they're actually taking it and turning it into pulp and then using it as substrate for their packaging too, which is awesome.
Exactly right. It's not just seed to sale, it's the whole plant. You know, you can build your facility out of hempcrete and it breathes and it absorbs oxygen. Like, it's such an incredible plant that when we're thinking of brands and ways to differentiate ourselves, we can think outside of just the audience and who's going to smoke this, but we can think in different ways. So we are, let's say, we're the only brand that takes everything that we grow and we use every single part of the plant. Fantastic brand story right there. You know,
Stefan, you should probably talk to like a large multi-state retailer and see if that could be a part of their corporate social responsibility initiative. Well, let's see if we can figure out where there's one that, you know, that might be willing to adopt something like that. Oh, sorry. But anyway, Jared, you're next.
Me? Or Valda?
No, we'll do you next. We'll start with the lady and then the lady. Go ahead.
So, I mean, I've been around for 12 years, so we have a lot of success stories, but this is a recent success story, and I just posted a link on it to all of the panelists and attendees. But we built a brand in Michigan called Narvona, and we won a global packaging award, which is given to, you know, people who are, it's primarily people we were competing with were like P&G, you know, Johnson & Johnson, Unilever. So, you know, a lot of the sub brands that they've built underneath these conglomerates were submitted, as was a brand that we designed called Narvona, which if you look at the Forbes article, we won the new brand luxury category. And we won that because of not only the sexiness and overall aesthetic of the brand and its intention, but to the point Stefan was making, you know, we wanted to make sure that we were being and helping our clients become more socially responsible by introducing 100% recyclable packaging. So if you look at the Narvona packaging there, not only did we get that, you know, for pennies on the dollar, but we got it so that you could recycle the glass, given the fact there's no label on it, and we embossed the glass jar so that you could use it as a keepsake if you wanted to as well. The box being separate from the jar, but as a piece of secondary packaging, you know, that's fully recyclable as well. So what this did was ensure that we were being, you know, just a responsible brand. And people seem to really gravitate towards that, primarily because there's not a lot of, you know, products in the cannabis space that people are developing with the intention of becoming a recycled good. So looking at those opportunities, one of my really good friends, his name's Tom Sasaki. For those of you who are not familiar with him, he created a company called Tetracycle. They are the biggest recycling program in the world. They work with P&G, Pfizer, Unilever, L'Oreal. And so what we're doing is working together to try and develop more initiatives as it relates to waste management for cannabis and CBD packaged goods. So
very cool. Thanks, Jared.
Yeah.
And Valda, your success story, or if you want to follow Stefan's lead.
Valda is a success story.
Oh, thank you. You're so sweet. I was gonna say, I don't have any awards in cannabis. I haven't been here long enough, but I definitely have goals. So talk to me next year. Maybe I'll get there. I don't know. But I will share a success story. And it's an interesting one, I think, for everyone listening to think about also how you're using, and we didn't talk about it much. We talked social media, but not Google, right? Search engine optimization. And so that's one area, looking at Google Analytics and mining and making sure that we've got the right keywords and so forth behind our website pages and the content that we offer and everything else. And recently we learned, it's pretty remarkable, that within Florida, so I'm taking credit for this one, Trulieve is becoming so much of a household name that it's Googled more than Chipotle. Okay.
What?
Chipotle, the
Wow.
restaurant chain. Yes. In Florida, it is Googled more than Chipotle, and it's within striking distance of Chick-fil-A, McDonald's, and Starbucks. So I say that to
Wow.
say there was a question about, you probably all can tell from some of what I was saying, I'm happy to do the non-sexy, non-visible stuff, because I would say, especially when you think about a house, right? It has to have a solid foundation, and then you decorate, right? Then you add the stuff on top. And so please don't forget, as you're building your businesses, some of those basic essentials. You have a web page. How is it designed? Are there links to it? How are people able to find it? Are you, looking at, are you searchable? Can people find you? And so we take SEO very, very seriously. I have that team reporting into me as well. And it is a meticulous job, but I say that innovation can come not only in the products you offer, right, but also in how you take some things that may be very generic, again, not very sexy, but you do it better than others. And because people are searching for us so much and they can find us, I think that actually, I know it does actually, because we watched the click-throughs to our e-commerce platform, but they actually purchased the product, right? So if you're searching, marijuana or medical marijuana or cannabis or whatever in Google, and you're in the state of Florida, you're going to find Trulieve, 9 times out of 10. And so for that person that is trying to learn and search and all of that, for us to be maybe their first time, the first chance that they get, that they try, that means something, right? To get that first look, that first purchase. So that's a success story for me in under 1 year within cannabis. And I'm continuing to kind of steer the ship here with Trulieve as we continue to expand to other states. But that's one little piece, again, that's not talked about a lot, but it can, have huge benefits. And as you're thinking about your business, consider also whether you're going to have an online purchase component, right? Is e-commerce something that you want to build out? And that allows you, of course, to have sales maybe in parts, places that may not be as close to your physical dispensary.
Thank you, Val. Well, good job with that. It's pretty remarkable. Chipotle is,
It's well known.
Yeah.
That's because people smoke weed before they go get Chipotle. So they're like, all right, weed, and then Chipotle.
So I'm just going to ask you all just to quickly go around and just leave some parting thoughts as we bring the webinar to a close. This has been really, really quite illuminating. So let's go in reverse order this time, and we'll start off with Valda.
I wasn't ready. I was like, wait, let me get my thoughts.
No.
All right. So my parting words are all, I would say, keep the faith, right? I think a lot of times as well, and I love that Stefan shared something that maybe wasn't a success, right? Because you actually learn more from your mistakes than you do your successes. So if you start along this journey and you try to connect and create a business in one area of cannabis and you're not met with immediate success, it doesn't mean that you can't, right, have a business in cannabis. You just have to figure out how. Okay. And maybe what you do is you connect in a different part. So that's why I asked the question as well as of Jolie. You don't have to own a dispensary in order to benefit and have a business that relates to cannabis. So that's one thing. The other thing I would say is innovation, innovation, innovation. And I mentioned, edibles, right? I think beverages are coming. There's so many ways that this industry will grow. I think I mentioned during our prep call for this, will cannabis be that super ingredient, right? That you see across everything, shea butter, cocoa butter, all these things. It's so funny, things that I knew growing up that were kind of whatever there, all of a sudden became en vogue, right? Superfoods. I see somebody mention that. So don't box your mindset in either. So for me, I've always been known for innovation in every single role, every company that I've ever worked in, because I'm the one that kind of identifies what I call a white space. So some area that's untapped in the market that exists today, and figure out how to fill that space with something that maybe looks new, maybe you deliver it in a new way, maybe it's the packaging that it's offered in. Like I said, maybe you extend from food, edibles to liquids, etc. So I would say stay innovative, be encouraged, don't give up, and surround yourself with people that are part of your tribe that want to see you win and succeed. And I'm happy to be part of that.
Find your vibe, find your tribe. I love that.
Jared, your closing thoughts?
Well, closing thoughts. Thank you everyone for joining the webinar. This was awesome. And the panelists are also awesome. I myself got to learn a thing or two, which is always good when you feel like you've been around a long time. And, it's great to hear other really, really smart women and men here, talk about, and even as the guests as well, bring up just really some interesting questions. But I think the final thing that, I want to leave with, and this is a little self-serving, so I'm sorry, but I'm launching a new podcast called Rebranding Cannabis, which launches on Tuesday next week or Monday next week. We've interviewed Ricky Williams, Sean Kemp, Al Harrington. One of these days we'll get to interview Valda. But we've got we've done about 18 episodes. It's primarily, thought leaders in the industry, celebrities, comedians, athletes, and artists. So Rebranding Cannabis launches in next week, and I'm excited to share it with everybody.
How do we find it? What platform?
So it's going to be on Social Club TV, the video version. So if you download the Social Club TV app, or it's available on any smartphone or smart TV. So my show is going to be on Roku, Pluto, Amazon, Apple, and about 8 to 10 other networks through Viacom. And then the audio versions are going to be on, all of your standard, SoundCloud, Apple, all of the other, platforms. But I'm excited. And if you guys get a chance, we filmed a documentary not long ago. It's also on there. It is called A Humboldt Story. So you can also go to ahumboldtstory.com and check that out. But that's kind of another success story, I guess. We filmed that in an effort to help raise awareness as it relates to Humboldt County and the supply chain issues they're experiencing there. Their cannabis is far more superior than a lot of other outdoor grown cannabis. I'm sure you would agree. And we wanted to create a piece, a short documentary, it was a 20-minute doc, to help pay homage to the growers, the knowledge and the experience that they, bring to not only us as consumers, but to the product itself. And those are my final remarks.
Thank you, Jared. Stefan?
I've got 3 words, which is quality, thought, and expertise. I think for everybody that's entering this market, they are really, really important that you always consider those. Is what you're putting out the same quality as the product you want to put out? Lots of people spend a lot of time on creating a product that they think is excellent and then spend very little time on everything else. Thoughts, go that little bit deeper, avoid those cliches, do your research, understand what you're doing, really, really think about it and find something unique. And then expertise. If you don't know, find somebody that does. Find somebody that does. Bleed off them like a sponge, learn what they know. And if you haven't got the time or the 20 years of experience, let them do it, but learn by osmosis. You will understand things, but you will never get 20 years experience overnight. So if it's not something you're used to or you're comfortable with, find some experts. It will help you and save you money in the long run.
Thank you, Stefan. And Elvira.
Awesome. So I just want to thank everyone for joining us today. I want to congratulate you guys as well, because if you're listening to this webinar, your mind's already in the right place. And I just want to say that to all of you potential or current cannabis entrepreneurs, you are going to have obstacles. We all have bad things that happen to us in our business, in our personal life, with our health, with our spouses, with our siblings, with our parents. But I just want you guys to remember that none of that should stop you from pursuing your dreams. None of that should stop you from pursuing your purpose in life. And I just want to give you guys a quick reminder that when you're working, no matter what's happening, you need to stay positive and enthusiastic. That is how you attract success. And just to leave it with the words from Napoleon Hill, what we think we manifest. So if you're thinking in your business in a positive way, in a successful way, if you're attracting wealth, because all of our thoughts are radiating out, that's what you're going to attract back in. So just stay positive, stay enthusiastic, and never, never, never give up.
Wow, Elvira, I should have signed off and then let you speak, because we really shouldn't say much after that. I mean, I agree with you 100%. And I love the fact that we sort of, ending on a note that's not just sort of specific to cannabis, right? And then marketing, branding, it's something that has an application across the board in whatever we do. But I just want to be very, I just want to say thank you to our panelists. I think this discussion today has been, again, dynamic and pretty outstanding. As we do this, and we want to, we started off on the premise of wanting to bring and connect people to exchange knowledge for this industry. Just to be a platform where we can connect people with different ideas. And I love today that there was a little bit going back and forth on a particular item. And I think that's so important. But the two things I want to just sign off and say is this. When we looked at the cannabis industry in the beginning, I was told that the market size was 75 billion on medical and 200 billion on recreational, right? That was the eventual market size of this industry. Every year, those numbers just increased substantially. And they're to the point now, it really doesn't matter to talk about the market size. The opportunity is enormous. And, it became a non-issue to talk about for what Val just said earlier, which is now you're seeing all these different applications for cannabis in all these different products that presently exist. So it becomes an ingredient in something else. And so I'm saying this for us to understand that while it's been a challenging road to get this new industry up and running, the future potential is so massive that it's worth staying the course. It's worth really figuring out what you're good at. It's worth really figuring out how to build those partnerships. It's really worth, enjoying the frustration of something not happening today that was promised from yesterday, and maintaining and taking from a discussion like today, the fact that, there's so much knowledge out there and there's so many people willing to help and support. And what I think is really important is one, yes, recognizing the massive opportunity in front of us and figuring out ways to navigate it, but also two, this very simple phrase I like to use a lot, which is, a rising tide lifts all ships. The cannabis industry today is nothing. It's a dot in terms of what its future potential looks like. And so if there's something that was beneficial to you today, don't just take it and say, this was great, and I go about doing my business. Think about how you can help somebody in the future, how you can pay it forward, how that person who's looking to start their own, they have questions about marketing and branding. Maybe you direct them back to this webinar, not because you're thinking I have a leg up on them because they didn't watch it, but because you're encouraging them to see what they can get out of this. So they can be in a better place, because then you can exchange ideas and all grow. I see too often that, and I reference Jamaica, I see it in the Caribbean. Sometimes there's a mindset, we call it crabs in a barrel. We're all fighting over that dollar. And that's what we're fighting over today. We're fighting over a dollar. When if we work together with a more expansive mindset, and again, incorporate some of the wonderful things Elvira just said, we're going to make that $1 into $100, into $1,000, into $1 million. Then we can start to fight and compete. We're doing on the basis of can I be a smarter competitor to you? And there's nothing wrong with that. But where we are today is we have to work together. That's the best route to get to where we need to get to. So I say, a huge thank you to my team that makes us look so good on this. Trust me, I just come up with some ideas from time to time, most of which are not good. They help me filter them as to which ones we should pursue, but the execution of this is really them. So, thank you, Asha, thank you, Dave, and thank you, Zamir, thank you, everybody else who plays a role in this. And to my panel, our panelists, who've given their time and their expertise so willingly today, I thank you for sharing that with all of our audience. And again, in particular to our audience, who've given their time with us today to come and learn and experience and engage. That's really so important. And after this, Jared has very generously shared some sort of how-to guides. Elvira, I'm actually going to talk to you offline because I think there's something on the PR side that would be very useful if we could just sort of, give people a basic lay of the land in terms of how they can move forward. And that's really what I want to see if we can do post this. So we'll send that out via email and share it with everyone who's here today and who registered. So lots of final words for me. I apologize for all that, but I just couldn't, sign off without sort of sharing some of these thoughts that I feel. So I thank you very much, everyone. I know we've gone over time a little bit, but I hope it was worthwhile. And we look forward to seeing you in our next CanEx webinar. Have a great day.